Hello humans, it's your host Kory, and before we get into this week's episode, I just wanted to take a moment to thank my patrons so much. I'm so grateful to you guys that you continue to support me and the show. Without that support, I would not be able to continue to do what I love doing each week, putting these episodes out for you guys free into the world. And so you make that possible, and I just really wanted to make sure that you knew how important you were to that process. And so thank you so much for your continued support of me and the show. And now we can jump into this week's episode. Welcome to A Well Cared For Human, the podcast that tries to convince you that you are 100% normal and an even better than okay example of the human species, despite the fact that sometimes we feel like the craziest, most incapable, or worthless creatures on the face of this planet. I'm Kory, an author, a creative, and the host of the show. Whatever you're bringing to the table today, I hope this episode proves to be a dose of inspiration for you on your quest to become a well-cared-for human. You can find the episode show notes, your free wellness blueprint, and more at awellcaredforhuman.com. And as always, thank you for listening. Hello humans, it's your host Kory, and we're back with this week's episode on energy vampires. Now, when I say the word energy vampire, I'm referring to someone that when you interact with them, you always feel more emotionally depleted or worn out after that interaction. Now, maybe when I say that, you immediately think of someone, they come to your mind, and you're like, oh yeah, I've got an energy vampire in my life. But maybe it's a little bit more nebulous for some of us who by some stroke of luck have not had many interactions with those kinds of people. So let me take it a little bit slowly and break it down bit by bit. Now, there are many different kinds of behaviors that would make someone an energy vampire. Now, it could either be that the person is extremely negative, meaning that they have a very toxic or depleted worldview, and so whenever you interact with them, you listen to them, they're just complaining a lot, they aren't happy with anything, everything is terrible, the world is awful, their life is awful, and listening to that negativity in a prolonged, consistent way can be really emotionally draining. No one wants to hear that kind of negativity for any kind of sustained amount of time. And so in that sense, it could be very draining. Now, if it's not negativity, it might also just be that they are someone who is really wrapped up in the chaos of their life. So, for example, I have a friend who it feels like her world is falling apart every other day. Like something new, terrible, and dramatic has happened. And so when you're listening to people, especially people you care about, talk about all the terrible things that have happened to them, all the ways in which their soul has been sucked out of their body by something else that's happened to them. So when they kind of by proxy tell their energetic drain things to you, you start to absorb that for yourself. And so it can be really difficult, especially again, if you care about someone, that hearing them go through difficult times can be very emotionally draining. And so if it feels like this person is someone who always makes chaos in their life, or they always seem somehow to be caught up in it, then that can be very difficult to listen to, even just secondhand. Now, in addition to the negativity and we'll call it crazy making or the chaos making, there's also people who are manipulative in some kind of context. So if you have someone they're always kind of bullying you, or they're manipulating you, or they're trying to get you to change your behavior by using guilt on you, like if they're guilt tripping you, or they're trying to make you feel obligated to do something like, oh, I really did this for you, why can't you just do this for me? So that kind of push and pull, someone's trying to override your needs, your will with their own, that's obviously going to be emotionally draining because you're sort of in this energetic tussle with them. And so that could be another reason why someone is draining you energetically. Now, what can we do about it? So if we're interacting with somebody and they're doing any of these things that might be depleting our will, depleting our energy levels, what can we do to protect ourselves? Because unfortunately, the burden does lie with us, that it's our responsibility to protect ourselves energetically from people who might be trying to take too much of us. It's for our own well-being that we have strong boundaries about that. Now, if you have a person like this in your life, the first thing I would suggest is evaluating that relationship. So do you want to keep this person in your life, or do you want to slowly sort of distance yourself, remove yourself from the situation? I had a really good friend, for example. We had been friends for a long time, so it was really difficult for me to do because we had known each other since we were kids, like 16. And so whenever I would interact with her, though, I would get so drained. She always had a new problem. She was always complaining about things. She was always going through it. And I'm a very empathic person, and so I was going through it with her every time I interacted with her. And so that kind of secondhand exposure to her self-absorption was really draining. And so I was like, oh, I just can't spend a lot of time with her because it just makes me feel so unwell and so tired after the fact. So I really had to think about that. Like, do I want to actually cut her out of my life, or do I just want to kind of slowly creep off stage, like back out of the room, and maybe she wouldn't even notice because she's so wrapped up in her own stuff? And so that might be the situation for you, but you're the only one who's going to know if this relationship is worth saving. And so let's look at it both ways. If it's somebody that you want to keep in your life, then what you can do is you need to look at boundaries around that relationship. Now, there are many different ways to set boundaries, and I have episodes on setting boundaries, of course, so you can revisit that. But one thing is to actually limit the amount of time or exposure that you have to this person. And so if, for example, you know that you can really only tolerate them for about 15 minutes before you feel your soul starting to leave your body, then you need to limit your interactions to like 14 minutes, right? That needs to be your cutoff. It's like, okay, I can hang out with you for 14 minutes because at the 15-minute mark, I'm done. And so you can control the amount of time that you spend with this person. You could also control the amount of access they have to you, so you can silence their notifications on your phone, or you can limit the way you interact with them. So maybe you're okay with getting emails from them, or you're okay with getting texts, but you're not okay with long conversations on the phone, for example, or long in-person visits that can be very emotionally draining too. So only you can decide what your tolerance level is. And so it will require a certain level of awareness on your part for you to even be able to make those decisions, because how will you know, even if they're an energy vampire, unless you're paying attention to how you feel in your body? How do you feel after these interactions? When you leave this person's presence, are you just absolutely wiped out? And have you ever considered that maybe you're wiped out because they're sucking you dry? And so only you can make that assessment. So we need to be paying attention to ourselves. We need to be paying attention to the signals that our body's giving us, our mind's giving us, if it's mental exhaustion, not just physical. And so with that bit of awareness, you'll be able to decide what your tolerance level is and then cater to your needs. Because again, unfortunately, that's what falls to us. That's our responsibility, is to protect our needs and our energy in the presence of other people. And so if you have that in place, if you have some kind of boundary around the amount of time that you interact with this person, it might be possible that they try to use a different energetic vampirism tactic to get things back to the way they are, because they are obviously interacting with you because they're feeding off of that in some way. Maybe you're a very sympathetic person and they really like getting that sympathy from you. Maybe they think you're a really great listener, probably because you can't get a word in. They won't stop talking about themselves. And so they're like, oh, they want that time from you. And so if you put this boundary in place and like, I can only hang out with you for 10 minutes, you might have to prepare to be very assertive with setting those boundaries and being like, yeah, I know that you want me to hang out for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. If they're like, why can't you just give me an hour? But you'll have to be firm and be like, no, I really only got 10 minutes today, and try to always keep your needs in the picture, keep asserting what you need to do, even though that unfortunately they probably will do some kind of pushback because they're thinking about their needs and their wants, right? But obviously you can't continue to indulge that, or you will be a husk of a person. And you don't want to be a husk of a person. So if you want to do the limitation of the time, that's one thing. Also, you can control the direction of the conversation. So for example, I have someone in my life who I love him very much, but he is a very negative person. And so he'll say things, like how he hasn't been happy for decades. And it's really difficult to listen to about how things are so terrible, especially because he's perfectly capable of improving his life or doing anything he wants. There's nothing holding him back but himself. And so it's challenging for me because I care about him. I love him, to just watch him sit there and sort of wallow in his own suffering and me not being able to do anything about it, because no one's going to be able to change someone who doesn't want to change. That's the truth for all of us, unfortunately. And so wallowing in that is very draining for me. And what I have to do is I have to steer him in our interactions, in conversations where he won't be tempted to complain or tempted to whine about how life is terrible and how it's never treated him right, even though it very obviously has, for many reasons that I won't go into. I don't want this person to figure out who they are or if I'm talking about them. And so, but the point is that there are certain things that he can talk about and he doesn't sound like a negative Nancy, so to speak, right? He gets very excited about it, or he enjoys it, or it's things that we can share. And so I just try to always steer us in that direction. And then if we come across a topic that it's obvious that the negativity has started, the spiraling has started, I just try to gently take us in a different direction. But if I can't, if he's kind of stuck in it, then the best thing I can do is, get off the phone or in the conversation via text, or move on in some way, because obviously he's no longer interested in being directed to happier pastures. So that's another thing you can do if you're wanting to keep this person in your life. You can try to control the conversation. But other than that, I don't know if there's a lot that we can do about energetic vampires other than just try to figure out how to make it work for us in such a way that protects our own energy levels. And so it really just depends on how important this person is to you. It might be necessary for you to really assess the relationship and ask yourself if it's something that you want to keep investing in, something that's really important to you. If it's someone, both of these people are people who've been in my life for a really long time, and they've been there for me in different circumstances. And so I do love them, I do care about them, but I also have to be protective of myself. And so you might have to make the same kind of assessment. Think about your relationship with them and ask yourself, do I have a future with this person? And I don't mean romantic, of course. I just mean, is there a place for them in your life? Because the other thing is that we change over time and our needs change. So just because someone was a really great fit for you for one period of your life and they really meant something to you at that time, it doesn't mean you have to stay with them forever. You don't have to be their friend forever. You don't have to be their partner forever. And so you are the only one who can make that assessment, right? I'm not going to be able to tell you if this person means something to you. Only you're going to know that. But it might be worth your time in looking at these parameters and thinking about protecting your own energy if it's something worth keeping. Because if it's not something worth keeping, you should give yourself permission to let go of that. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Just like with my friend, I just kind of gradually stopped hanging out with her. I interact with her very superficially now. If something comes up, if we have a short conversation, I just, oh yeah, of course, I'm happy, I'm positive. I've never sat her down and been like, you have sucked the soul out of my body. This is why I can't be your friend. I've never been like that. I didn't want to make her feel bad for it. I don't want her to try to change her behavior or change who she is. I think everybody's on their own path, their own journey. And so if she's happy and this is how she wants to be, good for her. But just to protect myself, I've had to slowly slink away. So you could do that as well. You could make it not dramatic. You could be as chill as possible, just kind of exit stage right. Or you can always use little polite lies, I guess we could say, which is like, oh, I know I've been so busy. And so you don't have to make them try to feel bad about who they are. But these tactics will all be up to you. You get to decide how you want to handle the situation. And so if you do make the assessment and realize that you don't want the person in your life, then there is no conflict. You could just let them go. You don't have to interact with them anymore. And again, how you exit stage right can be as dramatic or direct as you want it to be. The other possibility is that you could be very direct with them. And you may have to be very direct if there's someone who gives you a lot of pushback. So let's say, for example, that you started reducing the time that you interacted with someone and they were like, hey, what's up? Why aren't you hanging out with me anymore? Why don't you want to? You can be direct with them and say, yeah, I was really feeling drained after our interactions. I feel like when we have conversations, you don't really listen to me, and I just have to take in a lot of the information that you're kind of dumping on me, and I felt like for my own well-being, I needed to take a break. I needed to step back a little bit. And so I hope you can respect that. I still care about you a lot, but this isn't going to work for me. Be kind, but be direct. And sometimes that's just how we have to do it, especially if someone gives us no choice. I always try to be polite and not heavy-handed, because I know that I can be a very heavy-handed person. That's just how I am from many, many years of having boundaries violated by people. When I first started working with boundaries in any capacity, not just with energy vampires, but with anyone, I used to set them really firmly, like really aggressively, like, this is my boundary. And then if they pushed back, and then they were like, my God, why is it being so aggressive? Why do you have to be so firm with me? And this is because I had been so used to people who would not have respected a boundary in any capacity. They would absolutely have violated as soon as they possibly could have. And so I came out of the gate sort of swinging. And gradually I learned I don't have to be that way with people. I can just do whatever it is I need to do to take care of myself. But every once in a while, if that doesn't mesh with someone else's idea of what they want from you and what they need from you, you do get that pushback that I had experienced so much in the past. And so when that happens, you just have to be direct, and it doesn't have to be as aggressive, but direct and firm, being as clear as possible. And so that's something for you to think about. Now, if you do decide to go the route in which you are keeping the energy vampire in your life, if you're not going to slowly exit stage right to get away from them, you can think about how you're going to take care of yourself after these interactions. So if the energy drain is impossible to avoid, say for example with someone you work with, you have to see them every day, you have to work with them all day long, and maybe you can put some boundaries in place to try to limit your direct exposure to this person, but at the end of the day, maybe you're still going to be a bit drained, right? There's no way around it. If that's the case, try to build in the self-care into your routine. So if we do something that's really emotionally draining, know that you're going to need that extra hour or two of care to replenish yourself. And so start blocking off that time. Start thinking about what activities or habits you could do after the interaction that would replenish you more quickly. A lot of us don't have the luxury of just investing in self-care all day, every day. And so if you don't have a ton of time to recoup after you interact with this person, it will be even more important for you to choose self-care activities that are most impactful. So what recharges you the fastest might be a consideration that you make. Or what do I need the most after I'm drained by this person? Do I need to just wrap myself in a blanket, become a little human burrito, and just veg out? And it might also just be not doing things that drain you more. And so, for example, it's very normal for me to, after I've had too much social interaction, to do the human burrito thing, but then also to want to get on my phone and just scroll. But scrolling also is an energy drain for me. I recognize that. Like if I get lost in a loop of really cute dog videos even, it doesn't have to be negative content or anything. Just it could be positive content. But input is still very draining for me. And so if I'm aware of that, if I'm aware that this is also a drain, then I don't want to back an energy draining activity with an energy draining activity. You might have to ask yourself, like, what is your post-care routine going to be? If you can't escape an interaction with this person, what are you going to do to make sure that you take good care of yourself and replenish your energy levels after the fact? Because sometimes it's just not avoidable. I mean, I would love it if everything was just even and balanced, and I was only challenged as much as I wanted to be challenged, and I only had to interact with people who were not ever mild, even a little bit irritating, like mildly irritating at best. Wouldn't that be lovely? But we don't get to set those parameters for our lives, and so we just need to always be adding the counterweight and the counterbalance to the situation. So if you're depleted, what are you going to add that's the counterbalance to bring yourself back to restoration? And so that's some considerations that I wanted you to think about today when you have energy and vampires in your life. If you have an energy vampire, what are you going to do about it? Do you want to keep them in your life? Do you want to start distancing yourself? Maybe you just need permission to distance yourself from a person, which is really hard. Like I said, with my two people who had been in my life for decades, they had been in my life for 20 years, 20 plus years of my life. It was hard to be like, maybe I don't really have as much room in my life for this person anymore. And so it can be tough, and sometimes we need someone to tell us that we're not a terrible person because we need to do this thing for ourselves. So if that's true, you're not a terrible person, absolutely please take care of yourself. And you have some options for what you can do as far as setting boundaries, limiting time, limiting exposure, and only you know what's best for you and what kind of self-care you're going to need after the fact. And I hope that you will invest in your own well-being and give yourself that permission to always put yourself first. And that's it for today, dear human. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you are on a podcast app, then you have no idea that this was a video episode. If you do want to see the video version of this episode, you can go to my YouTube channel. It will be up on the YouTube channel there. Otherwise, I will be back next week with another episode of A Well Cared For Human. And until then, please take good care of you. This episode of A Well Cared For Human was written and produced by me, Kory Marie. The music was by Late Night Feeler and Esther Abrami. If you like what I'm doing here, please consider visiting my Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to the episodes, as well as a monthly patrons-only Q&A, bonus videos, and more. Not to mention that your Patreon support lets me know that you find value in the show and want it to continue. You can find me on Patreon by visiting www.patreon.com/Kory Marie. If you can't support the show financially, that is okay. You can still subscribe to the show, leave a review of the show, and recommend the show to your friends, not just the neurotic ones. All of this helps so much. And as always, thank you for listening.